Board 1, round 5, Alvin plays e4 with the e6, d4, puts on the pieces, and then he apologizes for that Deng, and Deng plays c5, bring us to the Franco-Benoni defense. Pawn advances forward, knight comes to f6, knight c3 is expected, or pawn takes. Let us see what Alvin picks on. Alvin takes the pawn, and pawn takes, opening up for the queen, so black is going to miss out on the castling rights. So white swaps the queen, and also black chops the queen. Knight comes to c3, defending the pawn which is on e4, and knight c6 is unspotted, following up with development of all the pieces. Deng plays knight comes to c6, knight f3. In this position, knight can come to b4, also pawn comes to e5, trying to open up for the bishop, as we can see on the screen. Let us see what Akut Deng picks on. Either e5 or knight comes to b4. All those are good moves to play. Plays e5, opening up for the bishop. So in this position, bishop comes to e3, can be possible. So he plays a3, trying to stop the knight jumps. So in this position, we see bishop comes to d6. In this position, bishop comes to g5 is a very powerful move. In case of knight comes to d4, long castling, bishop e6, knight can come to d2, a6, knight d5. This is a very interesting variation which we can see in the game, but let's go back. However, after bishop d6, Alvin plays bishop comes to c4, attacking the pawn which is here. Then king comes out to defend the pawn, but however, knight d4 was powerful. Short castling from Alvin. Knight comes into d4, so knight has to be forced to take. So knight has to be taken. That's the only move you can have to play in the position. Failure to play that move, then black will be taking the pawn which is on c2. Let us see what Muhirwa Alvin, KTLC's finest, can play. Knight takes, and in this position, pawn takes, knight, attacking the knight. So knight jumps into check, checking the king, and also using the bishop takes. So knight takes, and now bishop takes. So the bishop is putting an eye on the rook. That's why we see Deng plays rook comes to b8, moving away from the bishop threats, and now move most of the pieces. Alvin plays it. So in this position, pawn has to take, but however, bishop goes to e6, asking for exchange of pieces, and bishop has to take, but however, bishop before coming out, pawn take would be a very powerful one, but now Alvin has to take the pawn or the bishop because he has to get rid of the weakness which is going to happen to be on c3. So pawn takes pawn is going to be expected, or bishop takes bishop. Alvin plays pawn takes, and bishop takes is more by far, but he first of all takes the pawn, and now bishop takes is going to be unspotted, and you can't take with the king because you have an isolated pawn. So pawn takes can be unspotted because if you take with the king, you have an isolated pawn. So he takes the bishop, and now king can't take, pawn has to take so that it can support the fellow pawn. Pawn takes, planning to go ahead and play e5. Alvin stops it, he plays pawn comes to f4. He wants black to have the isolated pawn. This is fantastic play. We see Deng plays rook comes in. In this position, e5 is a very powerful move. Give black this isolated pawn. Alvin finds it, plays e5, and now Deng has to find where to put the bishop. So bishop is played to c5. So in this position, bishop d2 is the very best move, and after bishop goes to b6, we shall see rooks coming in. Then pawn comes into d3, king goes to h1, rook takes, rook d8, g3, bishop d4, b4, g5. That's the variation we are trying to anticipate in the position. But however, after bishop c5, so he plays rook comes to e1, which is a little bit inaccurate. Now in this position, bishop can always come to b6, and then the rook can still come into c2. So he goes ahead and plays bishop comes to b6. These youngsters can play interesting chess now. He wants to bring the rook to c2, and remember also pawn d3. Those are all threats which can be in the position. Plays king comes to f1, and now rook comes to c2 is a very powerful move. which Deng has to think about in the position. It's the only move he has to play in order to penetrate and enter inside the white camp in the game, because pawn d3 for now doesn't work, but rook c2 is a very powerful move. Yes, he finds it, plays rook comes to c2, and Alvin tries to think of playing rook comes to e2, and then he plays it, rook comes to e2, and Deng plays another strong move, rook comes to c8, rook takes, then the rook is going to come in, so it means there will be no work done. So in the position, either bishop can come to d2, trying to put some tactics in the game, but you know Alvin is a positional player. He plays, wow, he finds bishop comes to d2, and in this position so many things are on stake. So remember that now the bishop is anticipating. For example, in case of rook takes pawn, then bishop check, it means the rook has to take the bishop. So now you have to see a way of moving away from all those threats, and now you see that white side will be an exchange up. So after bishop d2, Deng goes ahead and plays king one, but however in the position still pawn d3 is a very powerful one, because of if in case of rook comes, bishop comes in with check, then we would see king goes to f1, rook takes c2, d takes c2, bishop comes to d2, bishop d4, attacking the pawn which is on b2, then we see bishop comes to c1, and that will be very interesting. Pawn can come to g5, and I can tell you black will be winning this one. Let's go back. After bishop d2, Deng goes ahead and plays king comes to f7, and now Alvin with the move to play. Everything is becoming hot. Everywhere you touch there is fire. So let us see what he has to play in this position. Now Deng is now attacking the pawn which is on b2, and even if you try to push moves like pawn goes to b4, still they don't work. Let us see what pawn comes into d3 is going to be a very powerful one. That's why Alvin has to give up the pawn which is on b2, because the moment you try to save that pawn, then a lot is going to be at stake. So he plays bishop comes to e1. Yes, he finds it, plays rook takes, and after king takes rook, then we see rook comes into c2, checking the king and also going ahead to take the pawn which is on b2. So he tries bishop comes to d2, and then Deng takes the pawn which is on b2. So in the position, so many interesting moves can be played, but however the king can get away. If the king can get away of sitting on e4, then Alvin will be in good position to play this game. But just know that the king has to get away of coming to the e4 squares. Then he begins the journey, plays king comes to d3. Okay, first of all plays g6, stopping any further advancements, because now he would go ahead and play f5 and then create a passed pawn in case the king is not near the pawn. That's why he plays g6, stopping anything. But however h5 should have been considered, but in this position Alvin goes ahead and plays pawn comes to f4, trying to provoke the bishop. So he begins the journey, plays king comes to e8, trying to bring the king. He doesn't want to sit anywhere along the dark squares because of the bishop, so he's trying to move in the white diagonals or in the white squares. He doesn't want to be anywhere in the dark squares. G4 is a very powerful one in the game. For example, G4, then we can go ahead and anticipate moves like F5. All these are moves to play. Rook can come to F1. These are all moves which can be seen in the position. But let us see what Muhirwa Alvin can find in the position. So Alvin plays F5, provoking the bishop to move forward. Remember, the bishop has to keep an eye on the pawn, which is on D4. So he plays bishop comes to C5. Now in this position, rook can come to C1. So it's a good move. Rook comes to F1. All these are good moves, but let us see what Muhirwa Alvin picks on to play in the game. Akut Deng has 14 minutes and 41 seconds, so it means he has time advantage. Alvin plays rook comes to C1, attacking the bishop which is on c5. So Akut Deng has to play b6, but however he plays rook comes to b5. Now this is not the best move in a position because the king can still attack the rook and the bishop at the same time. So Alvin plays g3, which is an inaccuracy because king c4 by far was a very good move. And now Akut Deng is in time to bring the king, so he plays king comes to d7. Now the king is willing to come in to support the bishop and the rook and also to enter. So Alvin plays king comes to c4. Now Deng is in time to play king comes to c6, defending the two pieces and also planning to enter. So that is going to be a very powerful one. So Deng goes ahead and plays king comes to c6. Now he wants to enter and dominate the position. So the rook is going to come down, attack the bishop, and that is going to be very dangerous for Muhirwa. So Alvin plays pawn goes to g4, and now Deng can now come to rook comes to b2, attacking the bishop which is on d2. So he finds it, he plays rook comes to b2, attacking the bishop. Then we see king comes back, defending the bishop. Now the king has been given a square to enter. It is going to be a very powerful one. Deng enters the place, king comes to d5. Now finally, he's just one move to achieve the square, which is a4, and Alvin is fighting to bring the king. But however, in this position, even the simple move, pawn comes to f5, is also a very good one if Alvin can try to think of it. So Alvin first plays rook comes to f1. Now he wants to support the pawn push, but now rook b3 check is a very powerful move. The king can always come into e4. So Akut Deng plays rook comes to b3 check. King can come to e2. King comes to e2, and now the king can still come into e4, dominating the whole center of the game and of the board. King e4 is a very powerful one. So Deng stretches his hand and plays king comes to e4. Now black has cut off the king, is dominating the whole board in the center. So he plays rook comes to c1, attacking the bishop, and now b6 should be played, and Deng finds it, plays b6. So pawn takes, and Deng also plays pawn takes, cementing the bishop to be on c5. d3 is unspotted. Rook goes into rook comes to h3, attacking the pawn which is on h2. These are all moves which are anticipated. So it means Alvin is in hot soup, and Deng is getting him slowly by slowly in a positional squeeze. You see that black is dominating the game and he wants to win this one. Akut Deng beat Ajuri Netanyahu Benjamin, who is the 3-time national junior chess champion of Uganda, and he managed to triumph in round 4, and now he's on board 1 with Muhirwa Alvin, and he feels he's winning this one. So both players have 4 out of 4, and round 5, this is board 1 of the Innovation Cup. Want to see who is who in this game. So Alvin tries king comes to f2, and in case of d3, then he can always come back to king comes to e1 or king comes to f1. Deng plays rook comes to b2, pinning down the bishop against the king, and Alvin has to find a way of moving away from the pin. Deng has 12 minutes and 35 seconds, and Alvin has 45 seconds. So it means this has been a positional play, power play, which has been portrayed in the game. We see king comes to e1, defending the bishop and moving away from the pin. So Deng first of all plays rook comes to a2, a time wasting move. Actually Alvin almost loses on time Oh my god. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for watching the channel, and I wish you the best of luck in your games. Deng goes ahead to win round 5 of the Innovation Cup. We win on time.